Welcome to another episode in our series. Today, we are delighted to be talking to a world-renowned political theorist and a friend, Yoram Hazony. Yoram, thank you so much for making time. I will briefly introduce you to our audience, and then I'll head straight to the heart of the matter with a few questions about your most recent book. Yoram, you are chairman of the Edmund Burke Foundation, which is the group sponsoring the National Conservatism series of conferences. In fact, you're going to be traveling to Miami, Florida imminently for your NatCon gathering there. You're also the president of the Herzl Institute in Jerusalem, where you are based with your wife and children. You have authored really a wide range of books, of which I'll just cite maybe a few in chronological order. The Jewish State came out in 2000. The Philosophy of Hebrew Scripture in 2012, The Virtue of Nationalism, which earned you the Intercollegiate Studies Institute Award for Book of the Year in 2018. And most recently, and this is the topic, this is going to be the topic of our conversation today, you've come out with a new book, Conservatism, A Rediscovery, which came out in the United States in May and is now out in the UK as well this month. And you'll be traveling to the UK for a promotional tour on the week of September 22nd. So we do look forward as well to having that book hopefully translated to other European languages, including in Spain, and to have you as well come and present the book in person. Now, I want to begin with a sort of a general overview of some of the arguments in your book. As you are well aware, in countries such as Spain and other countries in Western Europe, a lot of people have traditionally labeled their views as liberal conservative in a hyphenated way. And they assume that liberalism and conservatism, or at least classical liberalism and conservatism, are to some extent compatible. But one of the core arguments in your book is that the partnership between conservatives and classical liberals has turned into a betrayal, has turned into something that has made conservatives sacrifice some of their core foundational tenets of their philosophy. So in a nutshell, how come did conservative come to be confused with liberalism? How come did conservatism come to be confused with liberalism? And why are the two incompatible in your view?
First of all, thanks for having me for a second time. I'm glad that I'm not yet wearing out my welcome. I appreciate your hosting me on the show. Liberalism and conservatism, I think the easiest way to think about this is to say that liberalism is it's a political theory that focuses on the liberties of the individual. If you're somebody who begins thinking about politics by asking, what are the liberties, what are the freedoms that the individual has by right, then you are most likely a liberal. Conservatism begins in a different place. Conservatism begins with the question, our nation, our tribe, our religion, our community, our family, what would be necessary to do in order to strengthen this community or this loyalty group, to strengthen it over time so that it grows strong and exists through time over generations. Now, there is definitely a historical overlap between liberals who are personally very conservative and conservatives who love freedom. That there certainly can be some overlap, but fundamentally, I think that if you look at the last 500, 600, 700 years of development of political theory, there's a very strong difference between traditional Anglo-American conservatism, which is what I focus on in the book, and really any kind of conservatism that begins from the nation and then asks, what do we need to do in order to preserve it? This is a very different set of questions and a very different tradition from the liberal tradition, which tends to ignore questions of collective entities and to downplay them. The reason that they've become confused, as I write in the book, the reason for the confusion is that during the Cold War, when communism, Marxism became the principal enemy rival of both liberals and conservatives, and socialism was advancing rapidly throughout Europe and in America. During those decades, there was an alliance between liberals and conservatives. They knew it was an alliance of two different things. And so it was given the name of fusionism. What's being fused? What's being fused is liberalism and conservatism. And that was probably something that was, in some respects, wise at the time. It did lead to the defeat in the 1980s of the Soviet Union and of socialism for an entire generation in many places. But I think that the thing to notice is that during those years, liberalism became stronger and stronger, and conservatism became weaker and weaker almost everywhere, to the point where today it's very difficult to identify conservative movements, that is, political theorists or political movements, political parties, whose focus is on the life of conservation and transmission through the generations. And mostly what they talk about is freedom, which means that they are liberals. So that's the simple answer to the question, which of course, can be made much more complicated if you want to go into it.
Yeah, wonderful. And well, thank you for setting up the table so nicely there with sort of the different premises from which these two philosophies start and the ways in which they're not compatible. Now, I want to focus now specifically on the what you call the Anglo-American conservative tradition, right? You've devoted the first chapter in your book to a wide range of thinkers, Fortescue, Hooker, Koch, Blackstone. Now, I wanted to maybe have you describe, what it was exactly that these men were were seeking to preserve. What is that? You say this is a constitutional tradition. What was that constitution that these thinkers were seeking to preserve, and does it still exist today?
The common law tradition in England, I mean, it's a famous legal system. It's different from the Roman law, so it's different from the various kinds of codes that have been imposed in Europe for a long time. But there are also traditional laws like the common law in all sorts of places in Europe, although they've been buried to a greater or lesser degree. The common law is so famous for a number of things. First of all, it's interesting that the common law has at its root, it has a direct identification of England with the Hebrew Bible. The initial law code of Arthur is based on actual biblical texts, and over the subsequent 400, 500, 600 years, there's an indigenous development of the English legal tradition, which is one of the principal aspects of English and of English identity, together with the English language, the Christian religion, and that common law tradition gives rise to a very particular form of government. It has the monarch being balanced by a bicameral legislature. Those two houses of the traditional British, the traditional English legislature, are responsible for taxation and for updating laws. What that means is that the king doesn't have, in English tradition, full authority over everything. He needs to make some kind of compromise with his nobles and with the commons, and that balance is, today we're taught that that balance was first articulated by Montesquieu in the 1700s. But the truth is that the only reason people think that is because our universities don't bother to read anything from earlier stages in history. So I recommend to everyone, regardless of what country you're from, to pick up John Fortescue's small book called In Praise of the Laws of England, which was written in around 1470. Okay, so it's written almost 300 years before Montesquieu. And there you have a very, very clear articulation by the leading common lawyer of his generation of what the English tradition, what the English common law tradition is about. And he goes into not only the balance between the executive and the legislative, but all sorts of other things that are familiar: the executive veto, the jury trial, the connection between a strong regime of property rights, of individual property rights, and both freedom and prosperity. So we find Fortescue in the 1470s writing that England is more prosperous and its people are freer than in any other nation in Europe, and connecting it directly to the strong regime of property rights, which is descended from Hebrew scripture. So there are many, many things in this book from 1470 that when we read them today, we say, how can this possibly be from 1470? Weren't these things invented by, the Enlightenment rationalists? Isn't this all something that happened in the 1700s? Isn't this, what the French Revolution was about, or what the American Revolution was about, or the Glorious Revolution? And so part of what I'm trying to get conservatives to open their minds and consider is the possibility that we have been misled about the source of the freedoms and the well-being that we associate with modern Western democracies. The actual source for many of the things that we cherish is in a tradition that is fundamentally religious, that sees itself as being built on the Bible, that is very much nationalistic, that thinks in terms of our nation and its well-being and the competition among nations. All of these elements are necessary in Anglo-American conservative history to create the proper framework in which rights and liberties can grow and be cultivated.
Yeah. And, I think that is, in fact, a really good segue, Yoram, into the following question, because you've really made it starkly clear there that this is not only a tradition that upholds procedural procedural rights and the ability of people to have their, say, property rights enforced. This is a much deeper tradition that is grounded in the biblical worldview, right? And precisely on the question of the Bible, one of the core claims in your book is that Western nations in the wake of World War II have largely forfeited the Bible. They've largely abandoned teaching the Hebrew Bible, teaching the Old Testament. And as you and I were discussing just a moment ago, that I think that is certainly a point you can make about Jews and Christians, right? Who share the sort of the foundational text of the Hebrew Bible, but how are other religious communities, other peoples with different religious traditions to relate to the Bible? Is this something you're essentially upholding as sort of a universal standard of the tradition that should be applied by all peoples in all places everywhere? Isn't this one of the issues you take with liberalism?
Yes, certainly. I definitely, as a conservative, am interested in encouraging people to try to open their minds and understand that other systems of government and other traditions can be very different from ours, and yet can have their own point of truth and their own beauty and their own worth. So that's something that people criticize me about, because I definitely find Enlightenment liberalism, with its claim to have discovered the ultimate form of government that's supposed to be appropriate for all nations in the world at all times in history, I find that to be arrogant and destructive. And so the Anglo-American conservative tradition that I'm describing, one of the things that we see emphasized throughout this tradition over centuries is that the laws of England, even though Fortescue or Selden or Burke certainly think that the laws of England are the best laws in the world, nevertheless, they continue to emphasize that you can't simply take the laws of one country and impose them on another country, right? Which creates a radical break and a revolution which can go in almost any direction. Rather, they look to a kind of a trial and error that allows each nation to improve its laws over time. So on the one hand, I definitely would like to roll back the liberal conceit that we have all the answers for everyone at all stages of history. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I expect people to think that their own laws are the best. And I'm of that kind. I think that the biblical framework is the best framework that mankind has discovered. I don't believe that means that we should be imposing it by force on others, but I do think that, going all the way back to the prophets of Israel, you see a hope that someday the nations of the world will come around and recognize the things that are of value in the Bible. So there is a tension there, and we've lived with that tension for 3,000 years, and it's not going to go away. But I think your question was probably aimed in part at the presence of non-biblical traditions within all sorts of countries. Now, in part, there has been a certain degree of adoption of biblical political concepts and theories, even by non-Christian and non-Jewish nations. I mean, if you look at at India or Japan, these are non-biblical civilizations that they have their own way of thinking and their own way of doing things, on the one hand. On the other hand, they have taken on to some degree the form of a Western national state with a view of national independence, of national borders as being crucial for the well-being of the Indian nation or the Japanese nation. And so there is a degree to which other traditions that are non-biblical can and do adopt some aspects of the biblical worldview. I think that in post-Christian societies in Europe or in America, societies that where there still exist strong Christian communities, and or at least the let's say pro-Christian communities that have a positive feeling towards the Bible and the Christian tradition. My aim is at this point to attempt to have those peoples directly reconnect with their biblical inheritance. The reason for this is very simple. It's not simply that that I think that the Bible is the best framework. I think that anyone, whether you yourself are biblically knowledgeable or biblically oriented, I think it's easy to look at what's happening in America or in Europe today and to see that liberalism is the hegemony of liberalism after 60 or 70 years has collapsed. As of 2 years ago, from the moment that the New York Times started firing people dismissing their employees because they are liberals, and universities started ejecting professors because they are liberals. From that moment 2 years ago, I think that we have to say that there has been a watershed. There's been a cultural revolution. It's not any form of liberalism that is dominant at this point in the cultures of the West. That what's dominant is a woke neo-Marxism, which is not liberal. It's something else. It's a revolutionary movement. And when we ask ourselves, is this our future? Do the woke neo-Marxists have to win and destroy everything? I think when we ask ourselves that question, we have to be able to look clearly at what's happened and say, liberalism is not coming back. Liberalism is what gave birth to this woke neo-Marxism. Liberalism has proved that it does not have the antibodies, the capacity to fight and defeat woke neo-Marxism, even within its own institutions, even in liberal institutions that are dominated by liberals. They don't have the capacity to fight. And this is a different way of saying what we started with, which is that the life of conservation and transmission is a conservative life. It's not a liberal life. Liberal life is just about being free. And what you're free from is these traditions from the past. So if, as we're organizing ourselves to try to save these nations, the most important asset that we have is the Bible, is the political and religious document that provided the foundations for all of these nations. And so not only people who were raised religious and believe in God and have a religious faith, but really, I think anyone who can see what is coming, can see the cultural revolution that's coming, destroying everything from our past. Such people should really have to ask themselves, can I live with a biblical society? What do I need to do to help restore a society that's based on the Bible, so that we don't have to go with this perpetual revolution that is going to destroy everything?
Yeah. And this is where I guess we sort of turn to sort of the future and what conservatives should be thinking about when it comes to addressing what you've just described there in terms of the rise of neo-Marxism. One of the claims in your book, and you were alluding to this at the very start, is that conservatives and classical liberals have allied themselves during the Cold War. They formed this sort of alliance of circumstance. They allied with one another as a way to deal with communism and deal with socialism at home. And you argue that conservatives and liberals over time ended, they addressing issues in a very different way, and they don't really share much of anything in terms of the ideological foundations of their philosophies. And but then on the other hand, you do claim that in order to combat this rising neo-Marxism, we have to ally ourselves with old school liberals, right? Who are also sort of outraged at some of the woke tendencies that we see in society. So how do you balance the two? Is fusionism dead, or are you seeking to revive it?
No, I'm not interested in reviving fusionism. I believe that the terms of, first of all, I think that fusion itself is completely unnecessary and it's undesirable. There's a difference between an alliance and a fusion. Okay, fusion is taking two distinct identities, two separate worldviews, and trying to make them into one. Okay, and I think in general that this is not necessary in order to have an alliance. An alliance means that you and I decide that there are certain things that we have in common, certain interests and certain goals, and we decide that we're going to work together to attain those goals. But that doesn't require you to give up your identity as someone who's separate and different from me. So, I've already been talking about Christians and Jews as though we can and should have an alliance, which I definitely believe that Protestants and Catholics need to with one another, and that Orthodox Christians need to join this alliance, and traditional and Orthodox Jews are also going to be able to participate in this, I think, and to contribute. But that's not a proposal that Christianity should fuse together with Judaism into a single identity. The differences between Jews and Christians are very profound and very important, and nobody's going to be fusing Judaism with Christianity. But an alliance to fight the woke neo-Marxists, that is something that is possible and desirable, and we can definitely help each other on that. So in the same way, there are some anti-Marxist liberals who see clearly that what is coming is communism, right? That's the way they speak. That's not, they say this explicitly, and we are going to have to find a way to ally ourselves with those anti-Marxist liberals who have resources, intellectual resources, financial resources, ultimately all sorts of resources in terms of worldly influence and power. And what we need to say to them is, we're not interested in a fusion. There's not going to be another fusion. You're going to stay liberals and we're going to stay conservatives. You're going to work on developing your theories of anti-Marxist liberalism, and we are going to work on developing and building up and deepening our conservatism. And those are going to be two different things. And where there are common goals, we will be friends and we will collaborate. And where we cannot come to common goals, which is going to be on many things, then we will continue to be rivals. Rivals doesn't mean we have to hate each other, but liberalism is not conservatism. And the days when we were willing to accept that fusion are, I think, permanently over. We've learned our lesson that fusion ended up destroying conservatism, and we don't need to do that again.
Yes. Well, wonderful. And this really sort of addresses the question of fusionism and whether it should be revived. Now, there's also this sort of overarching theme across your book, which is the idea that it's no good to embrace conservative principles if you're not willing to live out a conservative life, right? And you finish your book with a chapter that describes your experience of the conservative movement, how you sort of first got involved in politics at Princeton University, how you experienced the sort of the Reagan-Thatcher revolution. Can you maybe share a little bit more about what it was that you found appealing about conservatism as a student, and then if you could perhaps give some advice to some of our younger folks in the audience listening who may be who may embrace conservatism as a principle, but are finding it very tough to live the conservative life that you live because of careerism or whatever. So can you perhaps tell us a little bit more about your experience of conservatism, and if you have any advice for young people?
Sure. Look, the observation that liberalism, a political worldview that focuses its attention, like a laser on the issue of individual freedoms, okay, the observation that emphasis, that almost obsessive, almost exclusive emphasis on the freedom of the individual, the observation that is a solvent that destroys all communities in the end, that's a very, very old observation. I mean, in Montesquieu himself already points out that the spirit of commerce, of individual liberty for the profit motive is based on consent and contract. That spirit, Montesquieu says, is unable to recognize the value in any nations or borders. And you can say the same thing about the family. My teacher, Irving Kristol, in the 1980s, wrote a book called Reflections of a Neoconservative. And we should be careful with the term neoconservative because it meant something very different in those days than it does today. Crystal, who was what today we would call a nationalist conservative, a NatCon, he published a book called Two Cheers for Capitalism. He believed that conservatism had to be based on religion first and foremost, on nationalism, and on economic growth. So he believed in the economic growth, and he thought that capitalism was the best system for the sake of the growth of economic strength of a country. Nevertheless, he, like many other conservatives, was able to say and to see clearly that if you allow individual liberties to go beyond their proper scope and place in the market, in freedom of speech, and to then begin to inform the way that we run our families and the way that we deal with religious traditions and the way that we deal with national traditions, he says that individual liberty is a solvent that will destroy all of those things. Now, on the question of how this affects us personally, I think, a great many people, maybe even most of the people who will listen to this podcast, have already grown up in a time in which the traditional family has been pulverized by the insistence that everything needs to be about individual freedom. And if you've ever had a family, if you've ever raised children, if you've ever been a child to an adult child to parents, then you know that hierarchical structure is not based on individual equality, and it is not based on individual freedom, and it does its magic. The family is able to transmit, to conserve and transmit, and to educate, to pass down all sorts of beautiful things. They can be religious things, they can be trades and professions, they can be wisdom, insights about how to live, how to pray, beliefs about what's good about your nation or your community of nations. All of these things can be and are handed down in the traditional family, and many other things that I describe in my book. And yet the moment that you start, as a community, you start telling your children, listen, I know that you're 8 years old, but you should feel free to decide for yourself what it is that you consider to be the right thing. And we see this insanity today that a child at the age of 8 or 12 or 14, in some places legally can declare them, what gender they are. I mean, this is the absurd outcome of 60 or 70 years of the invasion of liberalism into the family and into the schools, where instead of understanding human beings to naturally form into hierarchies, and those hierarchies being necessary for our education, for our protection, and for our flourishing, instead of that, we have all of the adults telling the little children, it doesn't matter what you choose, don't listen to me, do whatever is good for you. And after 2 generations of telling children, you should do whatever is good for you, it turns out that they come to the end and they're not happy, and they don't know how to make choices. And the fact that we told them do whatever is good for you doesn't mean that they have any idea what to do. And they themselves, these young people, don't think that they know what to do. And so we've seen the end of the road of this. So when my wife Julie and I, when we were undergraduates at Princeton, we had already seen plenty of it. Both of us came from broken homes. There's some more details about her background and my background in the book. But the short of it is that we came from very liberal communities where the young people had been raised in this way, and the young people did not, they were watching their families break up. They didn't grow up to be strong Nietzschean supermen and superwomen. Instead, they suffered immensely from the burden of the destruction of their families and the destruction of community. And we, in university, we got to live with 5,000 other young people I wrote in the book that it was kind of like Lord of the Flies. There are no adults anywhere. I mean, of course, there's some adults who teach courses a few days a week, but the community is a community that is entirely consists of young people competing for the attention and adulation of other young people. In that kind of situation, there are no traditions being handed down. There are no models of what it means to lead a worthy life that are being handed down. Everything's being made up on the spot, and it involves a great deal of alcohol and alcoholism and abuse of drugs and sexual experimentation of all kinds. I mean, this is nothing new to anybody who's hearing this. But what is new is that you don't have to live like that. And there are still communities where the life of conservation and transmission still exists. My wife Julie and I became Orthodox Jews already in college. We joined the Orthodox Jewish students community there on the campus, and there we discovered that there exists a community where the students are not all getting drunk and getting other people drunk so that they can try to sleep with them on the weekends. Instead, that people are devoted to a life of thinking about the Bible and thinking about God, the teaching the Jewish legal tradition, and much more generally, just what we would consider a philosophical life, a life of thinking about things and arguing about things and reading books and fighting, about which books should contribute to our ideas. That society of the Orthodox Jewish students at Princeton was so much better than the society of the decadent and abandoned students who had no adult aspirations, really. It was so much better that we were won over, and that's the life that we've lived. Julie and I have lived a conservative life. We're observant Jews. We live in Jerusalem in a neighborhood that's mostly religious. We have 9 children now. We have grandchildren, and I believe that these communities still do exist, and that an individual who or a couple, a young couple, an old couple, someone who is willing to rethink their lives and say, look, I can see the catastrophe around me. I see it, but what's my responsibility here? That's the question. Beyond, voting for a particular political party or lobbying for a particular policy, you can vote with your entire life. You can say, I'm going to raise up children in a conservative way of life, not in a liberal way of life. And that requires joining an Orthodox Christian congregation or Orthodox Jewish congregation. But it is something that you can do if you're willing to think that maybe you've been living a mistake. And I think that many people now are rethinking. Many people are looking at what's happened, and they're asking themselves, maybe I've been living a mistake.
Wonderful. Well, I do think this last bit is going to be very useful to a lot of the younger folks who will be tuning in to watch this stream, because I think a lot of young conservatives are longing for a way out. They're longing for meaning, and you've done a tremendous service to us all by sharing your story, Yoram, and by sharing your time with us. I'm really grateful that you've accepted to be interviewed. I'm just going to plug in your most recent book again, Conservatism, A Rediscovery, is just down in the UK. You can purchase a copy. Yoram will be on tour in the UK on the week of September 22nd. Thank you again so much, Yoram, and see you very soon.
Okay, thank you very much. Good to see you, and see you soon. Bye.